Everybody. I am very excited that you're joining with us for this important conversation. And we know if you are online with us, either by Zoom or Facebook, it's because you really care about the fate of our bay. We've all watched with alarm as the news has unfolded. So just to reflect, as Commissioner, Daniela Levine Cava, District 8, for 6 years that I've served on the Commission, I have been active on these issues. And we have seen chronic sewer pipe breaks, we've seen pump failures, plant overflows, we've seen sewage dumping into our bay and our waterways, and we have suffered increasing numbers of beach closures over this time as well from bacteria contamination. We have most recently witnessed the dramatic death of more than 20 square miles of seagrass meadows throughout Biscayne Bay. And most recently, we have seen, unfortunately, the fish, thousands and thousands of fish that have suffocated in the North Biscayne Bay area, followed by an alarming algae bloom. So I am not sure how much more our Biscayne Bay can take. That's why we're holding today's forum. We haven't even factored in the intense stress on our natural systems and our built environment caused by sea level rise. I'm proud to have worked with all of these amazing people on today's conversation to bring greater awareness of the plight of our bay and put everyone to work to find solutions. And these are the leaders in that pursuit. We know we need to bring new fresh water to the southern part of Biscayne Bay. We have a Biscayne Bay report card pending to come out to tell us the state of the bay by the numbers. We've asked for DNA testing to help isolate the sources of contamination. And we've also pushed to connect the vulnerable coastal septic tanks to sewers. So I'm very happy that today's esteemed panel is going to discuss the crisis and also how we can work together to bring Biscayne Bay back from the brink. I have great faith in the strong backing of our community and the incredible talent we have here that we will be able to save our bay. So I'm honored that WPLG Channel 10 superstar reporter Luis Aguirre has agreed to moderate today's panel. He is an environmentalist at his core, and it is clear in his reporting how much he loves Biscayne Bay. Thank you for the great half-hour special you recently produced on Biscayne Bay, and for the great work that you do every day to inform the public. So I'll turn it over now to our wonderful superstar, Luis Aguirre. Thank you, Luis.
Tall order to live up to, but I'll do my best, Commissioner Levine Cava, and thank you for inviting me today to be a part of this discussion that means so much to me. I'm a Miami boy. I'm a Miami native. Biscayne Bay means the world to me. I spent my life on that water, boating, fishing, swimming, water skiing. I live on Miami Beach, and I am in awe of our beautiful city by the bay each and every time I drive over that causeway. That view never gets old. So this is personal for me, probably the most devastating story I've ever covered in my 30 years as a broadcast journalist. But you know what? I too have a lot of hope and faith because I know many of you on this panel. We've had many discussions on the phone. Your big mistake was giving me your cell phone number over the past year, and I've been bugging each and every one of you, and all of you have left me with the hope that we can turn this around, that we have the tools that we need, that we have the will that we need to turn this around. And so it's so important that we continue this narrative and have these conversations so that we do whatever is necessary to save our precious bay. We have assembled for you today a panel of esteemed experts, people who are on the front line every day fighting to save Biscayne Bay. I'm going to introduce each and every one of you. I'm going to ask you to give a brief opening statement and also update us on your efforts right now. We begin with the chair of the Biscayne Bay Taskforce, Aguirre.
Thank you, Louis. And I too am a native Miami girl, little Havana girl that basically grew up. I'm very proud of where I come from, and also a huge Bay lover, advocate, and I was very honored to be named chair of the Biscayne Bay Taskforce. The Biscayne Bay Taskforce was basically a result of a call to action from many Bay advocates who attended the Biscayne Bay Marine Health Summit in 2017 with the concern back then about the declining health of Biscayne Bay. So the Miami-Dade County Commission, as a result, formed the Biscayne Bay Task Force in June of 2019, last year, with a resolution introduced by Commissioner Rebecca Sosa. The task force was charged with developing a final report with recommendations to improve the health of Biscayne Bay. Pretty simple, right? Not really. We held 18 meetings, heard 35 presentations from experts from the federal, state, county, municipal governments, academia, environmental organizations, and the general public. We finalized our report a year later and recommended an overarching governing and administrative structure to coordinate and provide oversight over the Biscayne Bay watershed, which was, for some reason, has never been structured. And we made recommendations under 7 policy themes, water quality obviously being the first, governance, infrastructure, our aging infrastructure, which we all have heard about, horrible things that are happening with the pipe bursting and such, watershed habitat and restoration, using the natural infrastructure as a way to help with water quality and to provide some protections from storms and such. Marine debris, horrible, horrible. We all have seen those horrible pictures. We see it every time it rains, every time the storm drains push out all that water. We see all the plastic pollution and everything else that ends up in the bay, sadly. Education and outreach, because without having education and educating our public and people and our visitors, we're really not going to be able to get our message out. And of course, funding. How are we going to pay for all these things and all these recommendations and all these projects that we have to build? But nevertheless, the task force confirmed what was already clear, that the science was already showing that the health of Biscayne Bay was in a state of emergency, at a tipping point towards an irreversible ecological collapse. It sounds very terrifying, and it should be to many. And sadly, the recent fish kill and the algal blooms gave everyone in our community a snapshot of what that looks like and how it affects everything, not just our health, but also our economy. The task force, of course, couldn't have predicted that a report coincided with that terrible event, but it certainly elevated our report and made our recommendations incredibly relevant. And since our report was presented to the commission last month, I am pleased to share that the recommendations were very well received. And a number of resolutions have been passed as a result, including a state of emergency for Biscayne Bay. And we will soon have a chief bay officer who will help build partnerships and ensure that all of these recommendations are implemented and not just shelved as many have been in the past. So with that, I want to thank the members of the task force, some of you who are on this panel, and for those who are watching as well. It was 18 months of really hard work, probably one of the hardest jobs I've ever had, but it was a pleasure, and I can't wait to get started moving things forward and continuing to move things forward. I'm sure that Commissioner Cava can further provide insight on other policies and actions that are forthcoming. So with that, I will yield to the next speaker.
Yeah, you want to give us a hint as to who the Chief Bay Officer is going to be? Thought I'd put you on the spot. All right, thank you, Ruela Begay. Next, we have my dear friend, Dr. Rachel Silverstein, the Director and Chief Waterkeeper at Miami Waterkeeper, who's been instrumental in breaking down the science and sounding the alarm bells for years, telling us about the problems that are plaguing our bay. Rachel, take it away.
Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you, Louis. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much, Commissioner, for convening this town hall about this really important topic and for including us. I'm Rachel Silverstein. I'm the Executive Director and Waterkeeper of local nonprofit Miami Waterkeeper. We work, in short, to protect the water that you love and to keep it safe for swimming, drinking, and fishing. And we cover Miami-Dade and Broward counties. We focus primarily on clean water and water pollution issues, and also habitat protection, which around here is seagrasses, mangroves, coral reefs, wetlands, and also sea level rise, which is really the issue that affects all the other issues that we work on. And then we have 3 major approaches to tackle those focus areas. Those include community outreach and education, and just 2 programs to bring up there. We have our Junior Ambassador program, which is environmental leadership training for high school students. And then for anybody in the community, we also have our 1,000 Eyes on the Water pollution observing program. So it'll train you how to know if there's a pollution event going on when you're going about your daily life and how to report it. That is, both of those programs are now entirely virtual, but you can take the 1 hour 1,000 Eyes on the Water training on our website. I encourage everybody to do so. And then we also do scientific research, and science is at the core of everything that we do in all of our policy positions. We both produce peer-reviewed literature at Miami Waterkeeper, and we stay on top of the latest literature that is being published in the scientific journals. So that informs all of our policy positions and our outreach work. And then finally, we also do advocacy. So we will work with elected officials, of course, on management decisions and policy decisions that affect our waterways and keep them clean. And we will, if necessary, also go to court to protect our environmental laws, which we have done in the past as well. So of course, we have had a lot of interest and attention on the Bay recently because of the fish kill that started near Morningside Park on August 10th. It was really a devastating event. We're not sure exactly how many fish were killed. We know dozens of species were affected, thousands, if not tens of thousands of different kinds of wildlife, from seahorses to eels to lobsters to pufferfish. To even snook and barracuda were affected in the fish kill, and lots of seagrass was killed on top of the major seagrass die-off that the Bay has been experiencing in the last several years, where we've lost over 80% of it. The major underlying factors that have led to both the seagrass die-off in Biscayne Bay, particularly in northern Biscayne Bay, where we saw the most severe fish kill, and the result of the fish kill, which was subsequently followed by algae blooms. The core of that is all due to a buildup of too much pollution in Biscayne Bay, and specifically nutrient pollution. And nutrients are things like nitrogen and phosphorus that are found in fertilizers that make plants grow when you put it on your garden at home. But when it gets into the waterways, and particularly into Biscayne Bay, which is really sensitive to nutrient pollution, it causes problems like the seagrass die-offs we've been seeing, like the fish kill. And I can explain more later how that works in these intros, but it all can be traced back to nutrient pollution from sources getting into Biscayne Bay, like fertilizer runoff, septic tank leaching through the groundwater and getting into the surface waters, sewage leaks, and stormwater runoff. And those are the major sources of nutrient pollution that are affecting Biscayne Bay that we have to work really hard now to address. So happy to answer more questions. Again, thank you for having me here. There's lots of ground to cover with Biscayne Bay, and this is a great group. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. And you gave me the perfect segue to our next panelist, who is a director of Oceans and Coastlines Division at FIU's Institute of the Environment and a leading seagrass expert. And seagrass seems to be the key to saving Biscayne Bay. Dr. Jim Forkran, thank you for joining us again and being part of this conversation. Take it away.
Well, thank you, Louis. I'm very happy to be here. And Commissioner Levine Cava, thank you for inviting me. And thank you, Rachel, for saying everything I was going to say. So I can just pass to the next person. So why, you said a really important thing, Rachel, and that is that Biscayne Bay is really sensitive to nutrients. And let me try to put this in kind of easy to understand terms about why it is. Our Everglades ecosystem that filters the fresh water that falls as rain on the Florida Peninsula is incredibly efficient at scrubbing phosphorus out of the water. So by the time water runs through the Everglades, and say before Europeans got here and started building islands in the middle of Biscayne Bay and digging canals and draining the Everglades, the water that was reaching the coastline of South Florida had literally zero phosphorus in it. And what that meant was that the plants that are growing in the marine system in Biscayne Bay and in Florida Bay were really being limited in how fast they could grow because there was so little phosphorus. And what that does is it gives the competitive advantage to things that grow very slowly. And that turtle grass that we all know and love in South Florida, the seagrass that's about, you know, half an inch wide that washes up on the beaches, that stuff is the slowest growing seagrass and the slowest growing marine plant we have. Our corals that used to be quite common all through the hard bottom areas of Biscayne Bay are also very slow growing because they're the things that, well, they're slow growing, so that makes them dominant in this naturally low phosphorus environment. So we came along as humans, and we started building houses and building industry and changing the flow of water through the Everglades for flood control. And we basically blocked that phosphorus filter from working. And we've added a lot more phosphorus in the near shore. So that phosphorus is now getting into our marine water and allowing things that grow faster than the seagrasses that we love and the corals that we love can grow. And if things grow faster, they're competitively dominant. So what we've been seeing for decades and decades now in Biscayne Bay is at first slow increase in seagrasses followed by a rapid change in the species composition from slow growing things to fast growing things. And now in the northern part of Biscayne Bay, we've gone over the edge. So there's so much phosphorus within the system that the plankton, the microalgae that grow the fastest can proliferate and rob the bottom of light so that none of those slow growing things can grow. So it's the geology and the natural system of Florida that set us up to have that beautiful blue bay that attracted people here in the 1800s. And it also is the reason that our system is so sensitive to the addition of nutrients. And we got to stop. We have to stop putting phosphorus into the bay so that we can get it back to that system that attracted us here in the first place. Thanks.
And it can be done.
It can be done. I'd like to point out, across the peninsula in Tampa, they had this same problem. It started that they realized in the 1960s and the 1970s. They enacted nutrient control across the entire watershed in 3 counties. They stuck with the plan that took them 40 years before they started seeing positive results. But they finally made their goal of bringing seagrasses back. So it can be done, and we're better than Tampa. So we should be able to do it better.
Yeah, there's another wrinkle in this equation that needs to be talked about, and that's sea level rise, and the surface of the ocean, our waters are definitely getting hotter. Water temperature was definitely a factor in the massive fish kill that we saw and the subsequent algae bloom that we saw. With that, I'd like to bring in Dr. Tiffany Troxler, who's Director of Science for Sea Level Solutions at FIU's Institute of Environment. You're also a member of the Biscayne Bay Taskforce. Fill us in on what's going on now, Tiffany.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Louis, and thanks for the invitation to be here today. So yeah, I'll just sort of extend the example of what comprises vulnerability to degradation for Biscayne Bay. And you know, when we can think about recovery of Biscayne Bay as the flip side of what makes it vulnerable, it's increasing its resilience. And so, you know, we've got a system that's highly exposed to nutrient pollution. For example, northern Biscayne Bay is more sensitive to nutrient pollution in part because of less exchange of water with the ocean. And as Dr. Forkran alluded to, that parts of the bay that have lost seagrass meadows they have less capacity to adapt to you know, shocks and stresses, because when we lose seagrass meadows, we lose the capacity for those ecosystem elements to buffer the impacts of nutrient pollution, to help keep water oxygenated, stabilize sediments, to help keep water clear and help suck up nutrients. So in order to increase the resilience of Biscayne Bay, and in particular Northern Bay, to climate change impacts like increasing temperatures and sea level rise and other shocks and stressors like sewage breaks, for example, we need to manage for the impacts of the factors that comprise bay vulnerability, And so as part of the plan to achieve long-term bay resilience, the Biscayne Bay Taskforce recommended a watershed approach to achieving deep reduction in nutrient loads, and that alludes back to Dr. Forkran's explanation of, this is a bay that is highly influenced by the watershed and the water that's fed into the bay. And we're not just talking about the coastline along the bay. This is starting at the edge of the Everglades and zeroing in on the most critical sources of land-based pollutants. And so this includes implementing projects that help to store, slow down, and treat water discharging from canals and from stormwater pipes. And really some of the same things that are being considered to restore the Southern Bay can also be done to improve conditions in the Northern and Central Bay. And then also, we're all thinking about climate change adaptation. So, when done thoughtfully and based on best available science, those types of projects that help us to manage flood risks can also help us to achieve water quality improvements by increasing habitat and natural infrastructure and improving the quality of water that reaches Biscayne Bay. And then, there are a number of other co-benefits that come along with those kinds of actions, like increasing access to recreational areas throughout our watershed, as well as sequestering carbon dioxide that helps to mitigate climate change. And infrastructure is such an important part of this. That we know that there's infrastructure that is failing and being increasingly compromised by rising groundwater levels due to sea level rise near the coast. And septic systems, we know that there are a number of septic systems in the Little River Basin. And in fact, if you look at some of the data, it's estimated that 8,000 septic systems are potentially compromised by high groundwater levels at some time of the year in the Little River Basin that empties into Biscayne Bay. So, in order to start to recover seagrass beds, increase the resilience of Biscayne Bay in the face of the next set of shocks and stressors, which include impacts from climate change, we need to manage the system to be a resilient system, to be able to manage for the impacts that we understand, the ones we don't understand that well as the ones we don't know yet. Yeah.
And it's here. I mean, we're already feeling the impact of that. Our ground level is rising, not just along the coast, but also inland. I know that Miami-Dade County right now is part of an aggressive buyback program to identify those inland areas that are prone to flooding because of our rising groundwater. And that in turn is being contaminated, as we spoke about earlier, Jim, all the septics that are leaking. So it's not just those that are vulnerable near the coastline, but those inland as well. There's no such thing in this day and age of climate change as a good septic tank. It just doesn't exist, especially here in Miami-Dade County. And that brings me to our next panelist, because it is septic tanks and sewage breaks that brought us together. My good friend, Seth Bloomgarden, who's the chair of the Miami Surfrider Foundation. And I remember that conversation that we had about a year ago about this problem of the enterococci bacteria consistently showing up on our beaches. So Seth, with that, take it away.
Yeah, and thank you, Louis. I appreciate it. First and foremost, I want to be sure to thank Commissioner Levine Cava. I know that this was not the incident that started everything for you. You and I have been in conversations about water quality for quite some time leading up to this. So I thank you for your continued focus and interest in this. It's truly important, and we really appreciate that. And also to you, Louis, as you mentioned, you and I have been talking about these water quality issues far before this issue with the Bay started. And you have continued to shine your spotlight and your cameras on this issue. And you've done a tremendous service to our community for doing so, both educating, informing, and empowering people to start to take action about this issue. As you said, my name is Seth Bloomgarden. I'm the chairman of Surfrider Foundation here in Miami. It's called Surfrider Foundation because it was started by surfers. Years ago, water pollution issues affected surfers first. the surfers were the canaries in the coal mine. They were the ones that were out there in the water day in and day out. And all of a sudden they couldn't figure out why they were getting sick. And they started coming together and trying to figure out what were the environmental components that were leading people to get sick due to water quality issues. Well, fast forward to today, and we're way beyond surfers. Yes, we love surfers, and there's a lot of surfers that are part of our family, but you don't have to be a surfer to be part of Surfrider Foundation. In fact, we've got people all walks of life that are part of what we do. And you know, who are we? You know, we are really the community. We speak for the community. We are your neighbors. We are the voters of Miami-Dade County. We are all volunteers, every single one of us. Not a single person in Miami pulls a salary or makes any money, including myself, for doing the work that we do. We care about our community. We care about what goes on here, and we want to leave this place better than when we found it for future generations. And that brings us to today and what's going on today. Like many of you, I live in this coastal environment, and from my window, I live on Biscayne Bay. And what I love about it is I can look out my window and see dolphins and see manatees and see rays and see families out on the water enjoying the beauty of what's surrounding us. And like all of you, I was truly horrified by what I saw over the past month with the fish kills and with the algae blooms. So this group is a tough act to follow because you guys have got some of the phenomenal science background, and I really support what the work with the Biscayne Bay Taskforce is doing, what Rachel is doing over at Waterkeeper, and the rest of you. We support all of those initiatives. So I don't want to repeat everything that everybody said before. We are 100% behind that. Where we come in is really understanding how the community can be more effective in responding to these issues. And one of the things that historically that a lot of the environmental and the political community and the science community has done is everybody operated in their own silo. The silver lining in all of this is that all of a sudden, the community has pulled together to the point where there is an increasing level of communication, collaboration, and cooperation, both among the environmental community. Many of us on this call have spoken many times before, whether it's online or offline, as well as the political community. And what we're also seeing right now is a tremendous increased uptick in activity in the community who wants to get involved. They want to know what they can do to help, what they can do to drive change. And by the way, this is a whole new group of people that we haven't seen before. These are people that weren't your typical environmental activists that were getting involved. These are people that are, you know, various professionals or people that live on the shores of various Biscayne Bay communities in an outrage. You know, they're outraged rather. They are beside themselves. They say, what can we do? What has to happen? So we've been in the role of trying to educate and advise people in terms of how they can play a role, how they can get involved. Now, obviously, we strongly believe that the issues that Rachel and Arella, Tiffany and Dr. James have already spoken about. Yes, you know, septic tanks are an issue. Yes, improving the sewer system is an issue. Yes, drainage issues, climate change, all of these things we're 100% behind. But we'd also like to see an accelerated pace to some of these initiatives move forward. The community is screaming as loud as they can. They say, what are you guys all doing? So to that end, when we look at the Tampa Bay plan, 40 years, that's a long time. We need to see what we can do here in Miami to accelerate that plan. We also need to take a look at what some of the low-hanging fruit opportunities might be, and at least get started on some of those while we work on the larger infrastructure issues. One of those would be a county-wide ban on fertilizer. Another one might be introducing a larger scale composting capability in our area. These alone will not solve the problem, but they at least can be steps in the right direction. So I think another part of this is hopefully as we start developing the plans together, we can come together with one voice and be able to educate and inform the community about what they can do, what steps they can do, whether it be limiting use of single-use plastics, whether it be going on beach cleanups, but also what we need them to do from a political standpoint, because we understand that not everybody is as progressive as Commissioner Cava in terms of taking on water quality issues. So we need to give the rest of the politicians and the elected officials support and be able to give them that strength to get out there and make some of these tough decisions to accelerate some of these plans and move them forward with all due haste, because we know the Bay can't wait. I mean, we're at a critical juncture here. And if the Bay goes, we're going to be in a very sad situation here in Miami. So, but I have hope. I think that coming together collectively, we can all move this needle forward and take some really productive action to improve the quality of our Bay. So thank you all. I appreciate it.
That does seem to be happening. I mean, people are screaming, and we're seeing activism unlike I've ever seen before. Advocacy is key, Seth, and as you said, a coordinated effort is key, and that is happening. And Dr. Krall spoke to this last time we had a town hall a couple of weeks ago, and said for the first time ever, 15 agencies are working together in a coordinated effort to address the problems that are plaguing Biscayne Bay. One of the key agencies is DERM, Dade County Environmental Resource Management. I'd like to bring in the director right now. Lee Hefty is director of DERM. Lee, take it away and talk to me about your efforts and where we stand right now.
Louis, thank you very much, and I appreciate participating with all these great panelists. As you mentioned, Lee Hefty, I'm director of the county's Division of Environmental Resources Management. That's the county's local regulatory environmental agency. We're charged with protecting air, water, and soil resources throughout the entire county. We have jurisdiction, including within the municipalities. And most people may think of DERM as, oh, that agency where they need a permit for this or permit for that. But they may not also realize that we're principally involved with protecting water resources like our well field for drinking water purposes. We also manage our environmentally endangered lands program, where we have more than 20,000 acres of lands that we manage for long-term preservation. And that's important for managing the watershed. When you own the land, you can manage the water on the land, and having land is very important for purifying the water. As Dr. Forkman mentioned, the historic South Florida environment of Everglades very much relied upon the wetlands on the land to process and treat the water before it flowed off the landscape into Biscayne Bay. And it's really important that we use science to help drive the decisions that we make. You know, I'm at a little disadvantage because everybody was so great. They pretty much mentioned all the issues at hand. I can kind of fill in and embellish what everybody had mentioned. We have completely altered our South Florida landscape. Historically, the natural system would swell with water during the wet season and slowly trickle off into the bay, and it was fine. Once we occupied this in more modern times, we lowered the amount of water on the landscape so we could dry areas for us to live, and we minimized the tolerance for the landscape to absorb the water. So when it comes, it's got to go quickly. So we can't flood the streets, so the water gets channeled to the canals and out into Biscayne Bay, and it doesn't have enough time for the natural system to treat it the way it did for millennia prior to our major occupation of South Florida. So you hear about Everglades restoration. So part of what we do at DERM is we collaborate with the state and federal agencies, and we partner with them, certifying some of the lands that we manage for long-term preservation to be part of CERT projects. And so by doing Everglades restoration, we're hoping to turn back the tide a little bit, where more of the water can go through the landscape and be processed. Going forward, we're challenged with the fact that our population has grown so much, and it's great because we love this city. There's so many of us that are here. And I am a Miamian from, basically my family's been here since 1900. So we keep making people, and we need to live in harmony with the landscape that we occupy. So as we go forward, it's great to see Commissioner Levine Cava. We need strong leadership to help people understand that as we go forward, we will have to live differently. What we're seeing now is changes in our system. Over the last 100 years, Biscayne Bay has been through significant changes, dredging and filling and sewage dumped directly to the bay before we developed centralized systems. And we saw the bay go through this alteration of impacts and recovery. And it looked like the bay was doing well through the 80s and 90s. And then now here we are seeing a change again. You mentioned sea level rise and climate change. That is another one of the factors that's affecting how the bay is reacting to the way we live in our ecosystem, in our watershed. So what we'll have to do, in my opinion, is use science to help put a fine point on things that need to happen sooner rather than later. The recovery of the system isn't going to happen overnight, so I don't want to tell people to be patient. What I want people to be is committed in the long term to make sure we get to the end game here, because it's going to take some time to solve the challenges that we've developed on the land, to change infrastructure, to change behavior, so that what we do on the landscape has less of an impact. All of this in the context of a moving target with climate change. As groundwater starts to creep up with sea level rise, septic systems that may not have been as much of a problem in the past will be more of a problem in the future. So we need to forecast and plan for that. We need to plan for infrastructure to go into these places so that we truly become a resilient community in the face of sea level rise. We've got data that goes back for 40 years that can tell you what the bay has looked like. It's at a broad scale that looks at all the canals and Biscayne Bay in general. I think using science, we need to look more closely at specific watersheds. We've mentioned the Little River Basin and what we saw happening this last month with the fish die-off. When you start to lose large areas of seagrass that provide significant ecosystem services like processing of nutrients that otherwise had been going out for a long time but didn't really show up as a significant ecological change, the seagrasses were very robust, but they got to the point where they reached a tipping point themselves and could no longer process those nutrients. So they died off. Without those seagrasses there, now we have nutrients coming out into the bay and there's nothing to treat them but potentially an algal bloom, or in the case that happened in this last month, something triggered depletion of O2 levels. It wasn't just hot water. The water temperature makes water less able to hold oxygen, but something depleted the oxygen in the water column. So we're looking at that to see if we can understand. Was it increased algae that didn't show up as a visible bloom, but maybe helped consume oxygen in the water and blocked out the ability for oxygen to be in the water, which led to the fish kill? So I'm a big advocate for using scientists and science to be able to help drive decision-making. We're not going to solve this overnight, especially some of the infrastructure problems that we're facing and challenges going forward. I think we need to be very careful in picking the things that will give us the soonest return on our investment in terms of seeing benefits to Biscayne Bay. So if we're going to go after septic tanks, let's go for the ones that are truly identified as causing a problem to the watershed. Education and outreach is critical. We can't do it alone. I have a significant, agency with employees, but I can't protect the environment by myself. I need every resident in this county to be on the side of the environment. And if they see something that's a concern, they should call the DERM complaints hotline and report it to us. And they themselves in their own behavior should be thinking about everything that we do. If you own a septic tank, when was the last time you had it checked or pumped out? Take an initiative, have it inspected by someone, make sure it's still functioning, take your own responsibility. All of these things, all of us working together between the agencies and our community are the key to going forward. Over the years, we've done significant restoration projects. That's another aspect of what we do within DERM. We've had a Biscayne Bay restoration program now for more than 30 years, where we've restored shorelines, we've created wetlands along the shorelines. Those kinds of things are what Dr. Troxler was talking about. If we can find areas of the county that are right now vulnerable, where people may not want to live anymore because their house gets flooded over and over again, if those lands can be purchased and converted to natural systems, then it gives a place for the water to go before it goes out into Biscayne Bay. And they can take advantage of ecosystem services provided by natural habitat to improve the quality of the water before it gets to Biscayne Bay. So I'm optimistic. The fact that there's been so much attention paid to it is encouraging to me, because I think it helps guide all of us working together to do good for this community and good for Biscayne Bay.
Yeah, I think the will for urgent action exists right now. With that being said, I'd like to bring back the commissioner. We have several hands up of the attendees who are joining us via Zoom. But before I get to their questions, Commissioner, I'd like to turn the mic back over to you.
Thank you so much, Louis, and to all of these great panelists. And here we have so much expertise over so many years, and unfortunately, it's disasters that call attention to the crisis, and then we finally take action. So I know the public is very frustrated. There's quite a number of comments in the chat about the fact that people want to see action. Enough talk, and now let's move to action. So I want to turn to our citizen groups who have been advocating, and now we have an opportunity to move forward. What you think is the best way to collaborate with the scientists so that we can truly move this forward. And I'd like to start with Rachel and then go to Seth, if we could. And I'll also just mention that, of course, Irela, who's chaired the task force, part of the task force recommendations on the Bay are to focus on community education and outreach. And Lee mentioned that as well. So we know that when the people lead, the leaders follow. So let's hear it from some of our citizen scientists. Rachel, please.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. So I think one of the key things that has really come out of the fish kill and kind of a bright spot is that we basically started holding daily fish kill coordination calls with the scientific community while the fish kill was going on and subsequent algae blooms were happening. And now we're doing them kind of on a weekly basis, and this ad hoc group that started during this crisis has really turned looking into a long-term future about monitoring in the Bay, and collaborations have formed out of it. And it's been really nice to see people coming together for Biscayne Bay. And similarly, we have done, we started organizing calls with all of the organizations that advocate for Biscayne Bay to get on the same message and coordinate the asks. And so that's been really beneficial as well. So building collaborations is really key. And as we have a lot of attention on Biscayne Bay right now, while we have been talking about these issues for years, and in fact, NOAA predicted exactly this situation happening in Biscayne Bay in their studies that have come out using DERM's data over the last 20 years, showing that we were having a really alarming increase in nutrient pollution in northern Biscayne Bay tied to the seagrass die-off, that we might have fish kills in the future. Sometimes it does take a crisis to make true action. And so some of the immediate things that I think we can do on these nutrient pollution inputs include a fertilizer ordinance. So we've been working for the last 2 years or so on developing a model fertilizer ordinance that is a strong ordinance for Miami-Dade specifically. That includes not applying fertilizer over the summer when it's just too rainy, and almost as soon as it's been applied, before the plants can take it off, it washes down the storm drain and ends up in the bay eventually, and causes issues that way. Also, it includes a buffer zone around waterways for not applying fertilizer directly near waterways within about 15 or 20 feet. So that's something that we can do immediately. That's a win-win-win. It saves people time and money. It doesn't affect your landscaping because the plants aren't using it anyway. So, that's a really great path forward that we are hoping that the county is going to take up. We've already gotten the city of Miami, the city of Miami Beach, the city of West Miami, the village of Key Biscayne, North Bay Village to pass strong fertilizer ordinances, working closely with them. So it's fantastic. But I think that alone is also not going to solve this problem. As many of you have mentioned, we have major infrastructure issues that we need to address. And that's septic, it's sewer, and it's stormwater also. And so on the septic tank front, as Tiffany noted, we have over 100,000 septic tanks in the county. The county's report from November of 2018 says over half of them are already not functioning properly, which means that they don't have 2 feet of space between the bottom of the tank and the water table. So contamination is getting into the water table. And for me, it's an absolute public health and environmental crisis that we have over 50,000 septic tanks in the county today in properties that aren't working. And having proper sanitation is pretty critical to being able to continue to live here. And of course, it's something that's going to get worse with sea level rise. So right now, there's no requirement to have your tank inspected. I talk to people all the time who've lived in their homes for decades. They don't realize they have septic tanks. They've never had them fixed or inspected. So requirements to inspect septic tanks is something we can also do right away. Having a complete inventory of septic tanks is also critical to being able to get rid of them in a strategic way, at least in the densely populated urban areas around our waterways, like around Little River, where we know there have been a lot of contamination issues, and it's right near where the fish kill started and where the seagrass is dying off. There's also about 12,000 septic tanks that immediately abut sewer mains that can be hooked up. Of course, funding is an issue. We've been doing a lot of research into funding mechanisms for septic tanks that don't require the homeowners writing large checks, because that's not an appropriate way forward.
And if you could wrap it up, Rachel, so we can get to more
I will wrap it up.
Great.
So,
yes.
So there are some immediate things we can do, as well as these long-term infrastructure projects. And I'll just follow on what Lee said just really quickly. As they say, the best time to plant a tree is 10 years ago. The second best time is today. So these projects are going to take a long time, but let's start it now so that we have a safe future here.
Beautiful, beautiful. And Seth, thank you. And if you could be brief in your comments, because we have quite a few people in the queue for questions. Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. And by the way, I should say that I agree exactly with what Rachel said. I'm not going to repeat all of what she mentioned, but we're on the same page on all of those initiatives. Just to add a little bit to that, as far as the fertilizer ban issue goes, if you're not sure if your municipality has a fertilizer ban or not, We do have a way to sign up and get more information about that. If you go to our website, miami.surfrider.org, we'll be able to let you know. Obviously, the county-wide is the way we want to go with that, but municipality by municipality is also important. Another thing you can do, though, is get involved. And you'd be surprised at how much impact that you can have as an individual when you show up and you speak up and you get involved. So there's lots of ways to do that. One is, you can sign up on our website as a volunteer, and we can use all the help we can get in this mission. Another thing is you can sign up for our Blue Water Task Force reports. We actually test the water up and down the coastline, and we also put updates in there when we see something happen. Similarly, if you see something happen, if you see something weird happening in the water, you see an algae bloom or you see a fish kill, let us know, inform us so that we can then go ahead and take action and inform the public. This is critical. This is actually how this whole thing started to begin with, is people just speaking up and reporting it in different areas around town. So this part of it is actually really critical. In your own homes.
I'm sorry, go ahead. Wrap it up if you could.
In your own homes, we actually have a program called Ocean Friendly Gardens. And if you're wondering how you can convert your backyard or your front yard into something that might be more sustainable, we can provide more information about how to do stuff like that. And then lastly, when these issues do come up in your local municipality or at the county level, don't be afraid to show up or speak up, whether it be in person or virtually. Your commissioners and your councilmen and women need to hear your voice and need to hear where you're coming from, that you feel strongly about these issues. So thanks, everybody, and I'll leave it back to you, Commissioner.
Well, citizen activism at its finest. And of course, you've been so critical at calling attention, engaging people, and pressing for action. So back to you, Louis.
Yeah, activism is key and advocacy is key. And you mentioned commissioners and political involvement. We have Carol Keys, who's a councilwoman from North Miami, who has a question for the panel. Ms. Keys, you are on with the panel. Can you unmute your mic, Ms. Keys?
There we go.
There you go. You're on.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Commissioner Levine Cava and Louis, for holding this seminar. I've lived here, lifelong resident in a waterfront community in North Biscayne Bay, so I'm very involved. And as the councilwoman of North Miami, very involved with the environment. But something nobody has mentioned today is a looming crisis with our FAA, who has consolidated their flight paths, called NextGen, over Biscayne Bay. They are currently flying planes at a 15 to 20% capacity, which are coming every 60 seconds to 120 seconds. For those of you who do live near the bay, look up some night around 8 o'clock or 8:30 in the morning. Every 60 seconds, there's a low-flying plane coming up Biscayne and the Biscayne Bay. They're supposed to be turning at North Bay Village, but this is affecting our seabirds, our marine life, and worse, they are, the fuel emissions are contaminating our water. We are only at 20%. We are expecting about 300 to 400 planes daily coming up from MIA, going up and over our bay with contamination of the water. So it's not just from the septic and sewer, which we're working on, but they are doing this to us. They have made the changes, and the quality of life and air is going to be terrible. Louis, you've said we have to save and protect our Biscayne Bay. This new environmental calamity by FAA, which is going to be affecting our water quality, our air quality, not to mention the quality of life for this beautiful recreational park, can be stopped. We have got.
I think we lost you. Okay. So Commissioner Keys, that's a very important point. I think we should definitely continue that discussion. I don't think we have anybody on the panel right now that can address that right now, but I'm glad.
If I could just say really quickly, Louis, that we are very concerned about it. It was brought to our attention by several of the leaders in the area, and we are pulling together an opportunity to look at the facts and do an independent audit as well. So just to keep everybody informed, we are aware of the concern, and we are making sure that we get the data and that we push back to make sure we're doing it correct.
And you and I will continue this conversation then, Commissioner, as well. Okay. Next, I want to go to Sue Loisel, who's the Vice Mayor in Cutler Bay, an area, of course, right on the water that's also being impacted by what we're seeing on Biscayne Bay. Even though most of it's in the north, we're also seeing this creep down to the south. Go ahead, Sue. If you can unmute your mic, you're on.
Thank you. Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
You can hear me? Okay. So one of the biggest issues that I have is that we all have, the municipalities have lobbyists that work hard for our water projects in Tallahassee. And we spend a lot of money with all these municipalities fighting for their water projects. And then they make it through the House and the Senate. And we think we're going to get these projects, whether it's septic, whether it's stormwater, and then the governor vetoes. And we know he vetoed over $1 billion in our water projects this year. So I think we're wasting a lot of money. I mean, lobbyists have a place, but I think we're wasting a lot of money if we could maybe come together as a community and pick a project and everybody work for the 1 or 2 main projects, even if it's not in our municipality, and put those resources together of what we pay the lobbyists to do all this environmental lobbying for us, and maybe come together and focus on the top items. But it's getting every municipality to be on board with that. And I think our strong mayor would be able to help us, Commissioner Cava, and that's the only way, because it's very frustrating. Think of the hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars that we're spending on lobbyists to fight, and they're doing their job, they're getting through, but then the governor vetoes everything. And we can get match grants if we get that money. We can, and we lose all the matching funding. So what kind of strategy can we put together? And like somebody had mentioned earlier, picking 1 or 2 projects that we really need to focus on, and then really getting out to the municipalities and saying, hey, give up your other water projects right now and let's focus on this one, but let us have your resources to fight for those big items, because we're never gonna, it's just gonna be a revolving door and we're throwing money down the toilet.
Well, Vice Mayor, if I may, I think that's the goal of the Chief Bay Officer and the Water Management Board that was proposed and adopted by the Miami-Dade County Commission, correct, Commissioner Cava?
Looking forward to collaborate and not waste our money and spin our wheels. Exactly right.
If I may, just on that point, it is effective. And we've seen it, and it's been proven when we all have banded together to advocate for expediting Biscayne Bay Coastal Wetlands, which is the Everglades, Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Project in our neck of the woods. And so we're moving forward finally on the 2nd phase of that project. And it's because the county and many municipalities banded together and lobbied together to push that project that was almost forgotten at one point. And now we're starting that planning process. So it does work when you collaborate.
Yeah, and to that point, let's bring in Carlos de la Cruz, a board member of the Everglades Foundation, who's on with us right now. Mr. de la Cruz, you have the mic. Unmute yourself, sir. You
yes, thank you, Louis. And thank you, Commissioner Levine Cava, for putting together such an incredible group. This was a great discussion. I'd like to make one comment and ask a question to the panel. The comment I'd like to make is that this is not just an environmental problem, this is an economic problem. We know from Everglades Restoration, all the work that we do, that investing in the environment has a huge return. And clearly we have a huge problem with unemployment in Dade County with coronavirus. And all these issues will have a huge impact on tourism, will have a huge impact on home values, and citizens need to understand this. The question I'd like to ask is if the panel could talk a little bit about salinity in Biscayne Bay, and what are the, what can be done about the salinity, and what kind of an impact are salinity issues having? Thank you.
So
Dr. Corcoran, do you want to take that?
It looks like Lee was about ready to speak for DERM.
Sorry, good.
And I would defer to any of the other scientists on the panel, but I was going to say part of Everglades restoration, part of that goal was to try and return portions of Biscayne Bay to more of the historic salinity character. Biscayne Bay was historically an estuary. And as Jim had mentioned, you know, the alterations that were done decades ago when we replumbed Florida so that people could live on it, we dried up much of the landscape, and we didn't give an opportunity for the water to be stored and slowly trickle out onto Biscayne Bay. So the nearshore area was very much an estuary, which is not salty, not completely fresh. It was kind of brackish, a mixture. That's pretty much gone now, replaced with these pulses of flows that come out the canals when we have too much water on the landscape that floods our streets. So part of the concept with Everglades restoration is to recreate some of that historic flow paths through the tidal creeks so that Biscayne Bay salinity can recover to more like it was decades ago, where it was more of an estuary. The northern bay has got a challenge because we don't have large open natural areas that we can use for that. So it's going to be more challenging in North Biscayne Bay, but Everglades restoration, Biscayne Bay coastal wetlands is designed to accomplish that in southern Biscayne Bay.
And we invite the Everglades Foundation to participate in our advocacy efforts for the Biscayne Bay project.
All right, next we have a question from Diane Lockwood, who's the biologist and environmental chair of the League of Women Voters. And she has a question for you, Commissioner Cava or Mr. Hefty. Why do you want to convert septic to sewer when our sewer infrastructure cannot hold the houses it has on it now? Who wants to go first?
I can, oh, sorry, Commissioner, please.
Well, we have to look at those septic systems that are right now polluting our bay. And there are a finite number of those that are really the most problematic. And the county water and sewer department utility is going to be spending some of the funds that they have on some of what are called the laterals to get to the houses, which will greatly reduce the cost to individual homeowners, which has been a problem in the past. So we're actually within shooting range of dealing with those most susceptible and most problematic. So we have to do it, we must do it. Obviously, we can't overnight convert all septic to sewer, so we have to triage and prioritize those that are really creating the biggest problem. I see Rachel's got her hand up too. I don't know. You know, we're going to go just a little bit over. Correct me if I'm wrong, Louis, but just a little bit over. I'm hoping 10 minutes to be able to allow.
A lot of hands up, so we're trying to accommodate as many.
Yeah,
keep these questions and comments brief. That'd be great.
Rachel, yeah. So I just want to note that, you know, there are also issues with the sewage infrastructure, and it also needs to be repaired and upgraded and prepared for sea level rise, and some of these old infrastructure pieces and pipes that are breaking need to be fixed. But I also want to note, I see Kevin Linsky is on the line, who's the head of the water and sewer department. So maybe he can weigh in about the capacity that the system has for taking on additional sewer infrastructure, or maybe he just dropped off actually.
Yeah, he just dropped off.
He had his hand up.
He's back. He's back.
Kevin, he's back.
Yeah.
So I don't know if Kevin wanted to weigh in.
I don't see him.
While we're waiting for Kevin to join, Louis, if I could just add to the caller's question, we actually need to do both. We need to look at wastewater infrastructure and make sure it is up to snuff. And for areas where we currently have septic systems where they're not working, we need to look to extend the sewer system. And let's face it, we live in paradise, and living in paradise comes at a cost. And so we just need to make sure that we're committed to investing in what we need to continue to keep this place as beautiful as it's been.
Kevin, you're on.
Thanks. I will keep my compliments down. You have such a good panel. I was going to go around and say thank you to a couple of different people. One, just on the capacity of the system, I think that maybe we don't all get access to the same information, but it's been surprising. The county has done such a great job over the last 25 years of limiting the amount of water we use, that we actually have no more wastewater now than 25 years ago. It has remained unmoved for 25 years along with our water use. There is capacity in the system. We are in difficult time right now until about 2024, 25, when all of our new capacity comes online. So at that time, we will have capacity to bring on additional septic systems, and we fully intend to do that. There's a report released in the near term. Lee Hefty did a lot producing that report that indicates the tanks we think should come over. I do want to say maybe there are 3 things that I would look forward to participating in that would advance the discussion on how to address the nutrient issue. Number 1, it seems like we need to agree on a nutrient reduction goal for the Bay, which I don't think is that hard or impossible, but absent that, it becomes a little wishy-washy as we discuss it. Number 2, and you're going to find some great stuff in the septic report, we need to agree on where the nutrients are coming from and what their pathways are. And there's more work to be done there, but there's been some great work that's been done in the last year. And number 3, commissioners and mayors need to be given a grid that shows you if you invest in these policies or infrastructure changes, here's how you'll meet or not meet your nutrient reduction goal. So in the future, if I participate in this, I'm not going to move from those 3 points because I think it helps advance the discussion.
All right, Kevin, thank you for your comments. Seth, do you want to chime in real quick?
Yeah, and this actually, I'd like to address this to Kevin. Just a real quick question on that. What would it take to accelerate that timeline to move it closer? You mentioned you wouldn't be able to do that work until maybe 2024, 2025. Is there something that might help move this faster?
Yeah, so we're putting out close to $500 million of work a year, which is about as fast as we can run at the moment. That's to increase our infrastructure. That will not slow down our ability to take on new septic tanks. We have enough capacity now to start the transition. I have, and Lee can produce the same things. We can show you what the capacity is by basin, and we have the ability to convert tanks.
That is encouraging. All right, thank you, Kevin. I want to take a question now from Dave Doubler, who's on with us right now. Dave, you're on.
Unmute.
Yeah, unmute yourself, sir.
For Mr. Hefty, muted by the host. Hold on. Control A.
We can hear you, Dave. You're on.
All right, sorry. This question is for Mr. Hefty. DERM has stated that Miami-Dade County cleans county-owned stormwater systems once every 5 years. Is this once every 5-year cleaning frequency enough to meet compliance with our MS4 stormwater permit? And if not, how can we expect other cities that ride along on our permit to do more than the county does?
So it may not be enough depending upon where you are in the county. So as like with everything else, different parts, different neighborhoods, different streets designs end up with different challenges. And so I think what we need to do is look at stormwater infrastructure in general. One of the things that I'd like to do going forward is to dedicate additional staff resources and do some engineering analysis of the existing stormwater systems throughout the county, not just the counties, but even in municipalities, and identify whether or not we believe that they are properly designed and come up with new criteria to better manage sediments that run through the system, and then let that be a standard adopted by the county for all new projects. And then what we can do is work with municipalities and the county to prioritize upgrading existing infrastructure so that we then replace old infrastructure with new designs that are better for retaining stormwater, solid waste that goes through the system.
I think so. Go ahead.
Ask a question also there. Lee, it's my understanding that we still don't have a comprehensive stormwater digitized map, including the county, the state, and all the cities' stormwater infrastructure. And that could be a good immediate step too, to get everything like digitized and in one place. And then my other question for you is, what happens to the waste that gets cleaned out of the stormwater system? Do you know where that goes?
So to your first question about an atlas, so the county has an atlas of its own infrastructure. I think the infrastructure within the municipalities is somewhat patchy. I don't know how consistent it is. We do issue permits for every stormwater outfall in this county, so it wouldn't be difficult for the new systems to be added to our database. But it would be good to go and have a full inventory of all of the other systems, and then to identify some of those areas where we think the systems are not meeting what we think are needed for today's water quality challenges. And again, some of these systems go back decades. So they were installed years ago, and if nobody's building a new street, they never get addressed. But what we can do with looking at the way these systems are behaving is identify priority areas that we can work with municipalities and even the county's own system to upgrade those. but I think we also need to adopt new standards that address the challenges that we have going forward. We've seen, now with climate change, some of the new systems that have been designed on Miami Beach to try and address one issue with flooding have identified new issues with respect to the way the systems treat water coming off of it. So it's challenging. As we try to step forward, we need to see what works and what doesn't work. And your other question, I apologize, was related to your second question? You're muted.
Sorry, do you know what happens with the waste when it gets cleaned out of the stormwater system?
That waste should be dewatered and disposed of. Now, if it's contaminated,
Do you know where it's disposed?
I don't. It shouldn't be dumped back into the street, obviously. Once they vac those things out, like for other wastewater systems, we regulate waste haulers of, let's say, sewage and grease. When those get vacked out, they get taken to the water and sewer utility for processing there. So for the stuff that comes out of a regular system, I presume it could go to a landfill, or it could go to a place on land where it's allowed to dewater, and then it just becomes a sediment.
There's something that water management does. Do they do that? Water management, is that their responsibility to clean up all of the solids that are in our canal system?
Well, the solids in the canals are different, and the county manages canals as well. We're talking about the drains, so the storm drains in the streets. In order to keep those clean, because what ends up happening is what washes off the streets gets into the storm drains. This gets back to education, how we should tell our citizens, when you throw something on the street, it may look like the street to you, but it could be the bay, because it ends up in the system and it could overcome the stormwater control devices and wash out into the bay. So we need more education, more cleaning of streets, more cleaning of the stormwater infrastructure, and that will help us control what gets to Biscayne Bay.
We have a question from Matza Dubois from District 8, who asked regarding environmental sustainability, is there an effort to curtail the plastic dilemma? These single-use plastic bans are very difficult to pass. Education is key, but who wants to take on that question? I mean, is there a new technology that can recycle over 99% of all waste that is being thrown onto the streets? Are we looking into new ways of recycling and eliminating or mitigating all that plastic that we see on our streets?
Let me just weigh in a little bit, and then I'll actually make some closing remarks, because I'll have to get off. I'm so sorry. But we do have a single-use plastics ordinance making its way through the county, hopefully, to look at our own procurement. So we definitely want to reduce our contribution. We are preempted by the state in regulating some of these things, unfortunately. And as far as the new technologies, we've heard some very exciting opportunities that at our Biscayne Bay Health of the Bay summits on some of these things. And, it's very timely that we look forward to new procurement and invite those that have these new technologies to come forward and help us with new solid waste approaches. I spoke yesterday to the head of our solid waste department. He's looking at a range of innovative future ways of handling waste. And so I'm very hopeful that as we move forward with a new administration, we'll be able to tackle some of these things. So that's not a scientific answer. It's a policy and governance answer. So I'm looking forward. But I did just want to take a moment to thank everybody who's joined. This has obviously been a very intelligent and probing conversation, especially with the great questions from the audience. I know some of our scientists have not been able to speak as much, so maybe they'll have a chance to weigh in before we leave the call. But Louis, you've done a fabulous job, as always, of bringing truth and light to this incredible issue of the future of our bay. I do want to say a few things that are on the horizon. Stopping the use of fertilizer, we have an ordinance. It will be at first reading October 6th, and we encourage you to come and speak to it. We need everybody personally to weigh in and be aware of their own practices and not use fertilizer if they don't need to, and when they do, certainly to not do it during the rainy season. We need to plant our native plants that will never need fertilizer. So let's all be adaptive and embrace our unique environment. Listen, everybody, no wipes, no flushable wipes. They're not flushable. This has been the biggest boondoggle of all in our water and our sewer infrastructure. So please, please, everybody do your part. And when you do your mowing and your mulching, keep your leaves out of the storm drain system. They're not equipped to handle it. And that is also a source of nutrients. Join some of the groups that have been mentioned that are represented here. Participate in our volunteer cleanup days, our Baynanza. Support environmental groups because they are showing the way. And it's only through public engagement and public demand that these things will happen. So it's so important to have your voices heard. I look forward to seeing many of you October 6th. We'll have information out on our social media how to sign up. And I want to thank DERM and Waterkeeper for your guidance in the fertilizer ordinance. So that has gone a long way. And also Irela and DERM for working with us on the Biscayne Bay Coastal Wetlands Restoration Project, which is an important part of it. But for the viewers, for the citizens, you must continue to demand, you must demand accountability. And thank you to our media for stepping up because you are the most effective vehicle for getting the word out. We have long stalled reports. I wrote a letter to the mayor and saying that after the 2 years and beyond of delays in the Biscayne Bay report card, the update on the septic to sewer, most vulnerable, the DNA report, we must have that information so we can proceed. So we're going to move forward on the recommendations for the Biscayne Bay Taskforce. And with that, I bid you adieu and activate on. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Cava, and thank you to all of our panelists, and thank you all for joining. If you didn't get your questions answered during this town hall, we invite you to email the commissioner. She'll be more than happy to address those questions for you. Have a great day and continue to fight to save Biscayne Bay. Thank you to all.
Thank you.